Hello, my name is Linda Butti, and this is a slide presentation of my artwork. I began painting when I was very young. I was always fascinated by art since I was a child, and I painted consistently over the last 50 years. What you will see in this presentation are images of works I have done that evolves slowly and naturally as I grew and life changed into what I am presently doing now. You see here a portrait of myself when I was very young, 23, very earnest, looking out into the world. I went through a series of movements and changes, which you'll see in this PowerPoint, and I wind up now loving to paint the color and light that is around us constantly. I'm totally now influenced by nature. I started out, as you will see on the next couple of slides, in a very Italian-American neighborhood. I wound up going to Brooklyn College, where I got my BFA and my MFA. And then in 2011, after many years of teaching and painting and showing, I was awarded a doctorate in fine art by City University of New York and St. John's University. It all started here, Benson Avenue, Brooklyn. The story goes my grandfather came from Italy and built these houses that you see on the left for his family, giving each one to a kid. He had 4 kids. Very Italian atmosphere. We grew up inside and outside of each other, always hanging out on the porch. On the right, you see a typical Italian, probably somebody's wedding. That's me, the little doll in the table in the middle with the accordion over my head. Music and art featured a lot in our background. My father that you see there on the left of me was a machinist by day and made accordion bellows by night in the garage. And I remember as a little girl watching him constantly take a regular piece of cardboard and put it through a hand movable machine that made it fold, stretching it out, having a glue board, putting a material called sateen on the glue board, and then cutting out the sateen and placing it on the folds of the accordion bellow. Amazing. I was mesmerized. He had glue cooking on the little stove because that was very important to get the sateen to stick. And I guess I like the smell of glue too. It was just incredible. We had a lot of very well-known teachers at Brooklyn College. Philip Pearlstein, Jimmy Ernst, William T. Williams. And they were so influential in everyone's work. Gave us a lot of ideas, more than anything else. So, of course, everybody in the class started doing figure studies. I annoyed my friends for a very long time, asking them to pose for me. Of course, we did everything from life. And we were just very influenced by the people around us. These are some early ones that I did in 1974. I was going for my MFA at this time. I continued with the figure studies for a few years and found these boys sleeping on the beach one morning in Coney Island, and I just had to paint them. This, of course, is from a photo, but the one of Dick and Joanne, of course, is life. I very rarely worked from photos. At the same time, I was doing portraiture. I really enjoyed doing that. As you can see, the 2 on the left were these very pretty, beautiful ones, and then the 2 on the right were more intense and portraits of people I knew, my mother and a family friend named Jody. I went for my MFA at night from 1972 to 1975 while I worked in the day teaching art in prison. And I was having a hard time, actually. Every 6 months you had a review by the entire faculty. And it was a little touch and go there for a while until I showed the faculty this portrait. One of the teachers the professor went wild for it, and they all agreed. He said it was the most unique portrait study of children that he's ever seen. So this was the clincher, which pushed me forward through to getting my MFA degree. It is a portrait of my two nieces who were thoroughly miserable and bored as they sat for me. And this summer, I got to visit my mentor, who in the last part of my MFA, the last 6 months, was so influential in my work. He started getting me interested in Cézanne and composition, something I was not very good at. And he was just so incredibly helpful and really turned around my painting in terms of what I was looking for and what I started to do. Here he is this past summer, 2023, at his solo show in Long Island, and he was thrilled to see me. I was thrilled to see him. We had kept in contact over the years, but very rarely did we ever meet. And that is his painting in the background. He did all sorts of still lifes. He still paints. He is amazing. As I mentioned earlier, he was very influenced by the Cézanne painting on the left, and these are two of his. He did study after study after study. What really influenced me was he was an artist, like all the artists there at Brooklyn College, who painting was their life, and that's all they did. They painted and painted and painted. And that's all I ever wanted to do. So I started moving from large figures, as you could see on the left, to figures within interior scenes, concentrating much more on composition, which was very, very difficult in its own way. And I did these interior scenes for the next, maybe 8 to 10 years. So he moved me along from just focusing on figures to figures within interior scenes, which gave me a lot more opportunity to concentrate on composition. And my composition really got much better, and I was fascinated and did these interior scenes for the next 6 to 8 years. So you can see I moved from the figures on the left to figures in interior scenes on the right. And this required a lot more work, or at least a different type of composition. It really improved my ability to compose well. I think that's one of my strongest aspects of painting today. And I did this type of painting for the next 6 to 8 years. And by the way, all of this painting that you see, and there's like 10 or 20 paintings behind each one that I'm not showing you. So, as you can see through Badalamenti's influence, I went from just concentrating on figures to figures within an interior scene. It allowed me to study a different type of composition and enabled a little bit more activity in the piece. This is one of my most favorite paintings of all time. My nieces again, Melissa and Maria, doing their homework on the afternoon. These kids were terrific, and they still are today. They would sit there. I would say, please, another half hour, you can have ice cream. Just sit for me. And I just truly love it. They were really doing their homework in between ice cream breaks. And of course, I annoyed not only my immediate family, but all of my cousins and friends to sit for me. This is my cousin Laura. This is my cousin Adele. And this was me going to their homes, carrying all my stuff, setting up my equipment, and they were wonderful. They let me paint and paint and paint. More friends sitting for me. Now this is interesting because this is Pam in 1975, which was typical of what I was doing at the time. But you see, 4 years later, the composition changes. I start to add more elements other than the figure, and I start to stretch the bottom of the canvas. I start to get a little bit more abstract and much more creative in the composition. And this will be the direction I'll go in for the next few years, which you can see in these scenes. That is my father sitting for me. Poor man was retired, and boy, did I use him a lot to sit. And the other is a friend of mine, Lenny's place. And again, I'm interested now in more abstraction and shapes rather than the people. In fact, there is no one even in this scene. It's just Lenny's dining room. So you naturally grow and change as you move along with your work, especially if you don't stop. And I never stopped. And you can see the change here. Melissa, again, my niece, now she's a young woman, 1979, and Melissa, 1981, where the figure becomes less and less important and really part of the whole composition. And you can see in the 1981 piece, I add a lot more emotion to it, whereas in the 79 piece, it's her concentrating and reading. But the 81, I add a lot more of my feelings about it. Finally, I really start to run out of people who want to sit for me. And I started doing interiors with no people. And this was about the time that I was living on Staten Island. I had moved to Staten Island in 1974, moved away in 76, and moved back in 78 when I discovered Snug Harbor, which was totally amazing. It was really not populated at the time. They had moved the sailors out years before, and they were just starting to open it. And this was the Great Hall, and the maintenance men were very sweet and would let me come in and paint from life. Again, I'm carrying all my tools, easels, and everything, and I painted these interior scenes of Snug Harbor with no people in them. And at this time, having decided to stay in Staten Island, I also at this time had some personal changes in my life where I got divorced, and I started seeing things in a different way. And I started noticing the incredible nature in Staten Island, and I started looking out the window, and my color palette changed. It got lighter. I concentrated on sky. People were no longer in my paintings. My whole world was beginning to open up in a new way, and I started adjuncting at night in the colleges as well as teaching in the correctional facility in the day. Now again, I'm still painting everything from life. And not only did I bother the maintenance people at Snug Harbor, I bothered the maintenance people at the old Staten Island Community College when it was located across maybe 1 or 2 blocks from the ferry. And they let me go up and paint from the classrooms that were empty on the weekends. And again, I'm carrying all my 30s now, so you can understand I'm carrying my painting equipment. And this on the left is a painting of the ferry, of what it originally looked like. If any of you remember taking the car over the ferry, it's basically a parking lot. And you have the World Trade Center in the background. And I did a series I called Ferry Series. And there's another one next to it. And this was all from looking out of the window. I think it was a 4th floor classroom. I was able to do that. Now, at this time, I had some incredible breakthroughs. I met Dan Werner, who was the director of the Newhouse Gallery. He took a liking to me. He liked my work. And he gave me a show there at the Newhouse, solo show, and introduced me to one of the most influential people in my life, and still in my life, is Nancy Stein, who had an art gallery on 94th Street and was an art agent as well. And he introduced me to her. She loved my work. We had a simpatico there, and she started selling my work to corporations. I started doing works on paper, and at the time, the corporations were just ruling New York City in terms of money and power, and she really opened me up to a whole new world. A great agent. I met many other agents, and they all sold original works on paper to corporations. So in addition to doing the oils, I also have a whole bunch of these that I did. So you can see in this slide, along with the next slide, I did many, many pieces like this. And they were done with acrylics on heavy Arches watercolor paper. I continued to paint water scenes, but now a big change has taken place. I trusted myself to work intuitively from my memory and sensations of looking at waters. And now I would move into my studio after looking at the water, and start to paint from memory. I no longer worked from the scene in front of me. I worked totally in the studio from my intuition and sensations. I started getting much more abstract and doing much more larger pieces, which were becoming very popular then. So as it says here, at this point I had been seeing Carl for quite a while, and my brother lived in East Hampton and was a broker at Sotheby's, and we would go visit him, and we fell in love with East Hampton, and he found a little house for us to buy, and it totally changed my life for the next 20 years. We had apartments here in Staten Island, and we had the house out there. It was easy to go back and forth back then, not as much traffic, and I found an art community there, and it was just a wonderful place. I found my sanctuary. There was a little house in the middle of the woods in the springs, and I was very, very happy. And my paintings start to change again gradually. I'm feeling the trees around me. I felt my house was a chapel. The art shows that I was in required smaller work, so I started going smaller. And I started using mixed media now, not just painting, but pieces of wood. I had a studio across the hall from Norman Paint, Pate, who was very, very influential. And he's this wacky, wonderful artist, and he did a lot of collaging in wood, and I started doing that, and it worked out well for me to express my beauty and glory out there in the Hamptons. As you can see from these images and the two slides before, it was just incredibly beautiful. In the 90s, the Hamptons were not as crowded. It's a lot of space. We lived near, actually, you could have walked to one of the beautiful little waterways and bays, and we were 5 minutes from the most beautiful beach ever, Main Beach in East Hampton. All those beaches were fantastic, and I was totally in love and in awe with the place, and it was reflected in my work. Now my water is starting to get more and more abstract, and I was influenced by being at the beach all the time. I would stand in the water, face the shore, and especially in the late afternoon, the sun would come down and make these gorgeous V-shapes on the sand of purple and red, and I came back and I painted it. It was just wonderful. The Pulsing Sands image was on the cover of Dan's Papers, which was a magazine put out in the Hamptons in 1999. I was totally immersed in the beauty of this place. This is one example. It's a small piece, probably 12 by 12, of the new smaller pieces I was doing on wood. That was my house in the middle of the woods. I felt like I was in heaven. It was a chapel, and I did a whole bunch of them. And you'll see on the next couple of slides that they were slightly similar, a little bit different, but it's all about my beautiful chapel house in the woods. So you see I have another chapel in the woods on the left, and on the right I was still working at the prison, and they had started this new thing called free movement. When the inmates moved from program to program instead of having bells. So I used that to as the title for this little painting I did of all the beauty around me, all of the beautiful waters on the sand. So I had been doing a bunch of these, and when I'd come back to Staten Island, of course, I worked these in my studio. And years later, Nancy Stein, who was still my friend and agent, came to see these and fell in love with them and arranged for a representative from St. Patrick's Cathedral to come to my studio. And I donated several of these pieces, which you'll see in the next couple of slides. They were placed on the walls in the patrons' dining room, and I was very thrilled. I felt that me and Leonardo da Vinci had something in common in that our paintings were in dining areas. His, of course, was the Last Supper in Milan Cathedral. Okay, so that's where the resemblance ends. But it was really thrilling to know my work is there. So I continued with working on paper. I started using less and less of the gold foil. My paintings started to get bigger again, and I started to do sensations and images of the woods from my head. That remained a little bit abstract over the next 13, 15 years. As I explained in the type above the images, I was just enthralled now with beauty. I was hooked. Between Staten Island and East Hampton, my world had changed. I had come from Brooklyn, where there was one tree on the block that was green and then bare. I had no idea of the colors and the glowing and the nuances in the woods. And not only East Hampton, but Staten Island totally influenced me. And you'll see the next few pieces. Now I'm getting larger again, 30 by 40 or 40 by 30. And they're on mixed media oil paint. Not much acrylic, mainly oil paint on heavy arches paper. Now, I'm painting, and I'm still teaching. I had left the full-time job of the teaching in the prison in 2001 and started adjuncting a lot at Kingsborough and College of Staten Island and St. John's. And at about this time, I applied for a promotion and I was awarded my doctorate in fine arts based on my teaching, my showing, my work. I was very proud of that. I had achieved my goal of becoming a full professor. And of course, you continue to paint. One continues to paint and paint and paint. And now, not only Staten Island and East Hampton, but we're traveling a little bit more outside of the country. And I was blown away by the beauty that I saw there. And my tree series continued, but with a bit of a different twist. Now, about this point, the oils on paper were great. I loved the freedom of them. It was wonderful, but they were really difficult to frame. I had a hard time with them, so I returned to painting oils on canvas, and I continued to stay large. 30 by 40 for me was pretty large. And these two trees were influenced by just walking around Silver Lake. Anywhere I walked, I brought those memories back to my studio, whether it be upstate, whether it be Staten Island, East Hampton, anywhere. I just loved doing this for many years. I used to take tons of walks along the fort, which I still do. The one on the left was influenced by walking along the fort, Fort Wadsworth in Staten Island. And the one on the right was me influenced by opening my eyes and looking out my bedroom window one winter morning. We had moved to a new house, and it was magnificent. The little stinky lot with trees was growing and glowing in the lot across from my house. Beautiful. These are typical of the paintings that I made after walking in the fort. I was really, really mesmerized, again, by the color and the light that I saw. And my walking really started to influence me. And not only the trees and the water, but the clouds now I took an interest in. And finally now, clouds seem to be taken over, especially during the time of COVID, where I would walk, and beach scenes and park scenes, and just looking up from where I lived, I was just blown away by all the beauty and light and color. And though I'd always been walking in Wolf's Pond, all of a sudden I found a new love for it because I discovered frogs. And in this one, Serenity, I was so envious of this frog who was hiding underneath a tree with this beautiful universe stretched in front of him, his own private paradise. And it was just incredibly beautiful. We're moving up now more towards the present. This was 2022. And finally, this is me with Yuko Ni, the director of the Williamsburg Art and History Center. I have been a member of this center since 2014, and she shows a lot of my work. She's very supportive. She's a wonderful person. And, of course, the one on the right is me in my studio. I was very thrilled that this painting, which I love very much, was accepted into the Staten Island Museum Jewelry Show in 2022 and remained in that exhibit, of course, for a year and a half. Again, it is my influence of walking, looking, and absorbing. So I went from dark interior scenes from Brooklyn when I first started painting into the color and light of the world around me and nature, largely influenced by where I lived, I walked. I am enthralled with nature. The clouds beckon to me. I love the color and the nuance, and it never stops being fascinating to me. And I go into my studio and I paint and I work out color theories, and I'm just enthralled. I walk in the clouds, and it's really where I want to be. Thank you so much for plowing through this PowerPoint. I really appreciate it. And my life now, it's always in the clouds.